What happens when Hollywood's most legendary tough guy walks into a den of daytime television hosts who think they can push him around? Clint Eastwood, known for his steely gaze and calm authority, found himself face-to-face with Joy Behar in what began as a routine promotional appearance on national television, but spiraled into an unforgettable clash. The show's energy was high as cameras rolled, and Whoopi Goldberg introduced Eastwood with a warm smile, prompting loud applause from the studio audience. Eastwood entered with quiet confidence, nodded politely, and settled into his chair. His weathered hands rested calmly on the armrests. "Thank you for having me," he said in that unmistakable gravelly voice. Whoopi eased into the interview, keeping things professional. "So Clint, tell us about your latest project. What drew you to this particular story?" Eastwood leaned slightly forward, thoughtful. "It's about second chances," he said. "Sometimes people deserve another shot at redemption, even when society's written them off." Sarah Haynes responded warmly. "That's such a beautiful theme. How do you choose which stories to tell at this stage in your incredible career?" Eastwood replied without hesitation. "I look for truth. Stories that say something real about the human condition. Hollywood's got enough fantasy." For a while, the conversation flowed naturally. Eastwood talked about his directing process, the kinds of actors he enjoys working with, and how storytelling has evolved over time. The audience was clearly engaged, hanging on to his every word. But while the other hosts engaged with Clint respectfully, Joy Behar had remained unusually quiet, leaning back in her chair, waiting for a moment. That moment arrived, and she took it. "Clint, can I ask you something?" Her tone was notably different, sharper, more deliberate. "You talk about truth and redemption. But don't you think some of your past comments about certain political figures might contradict that message?" The air shifted. Even Whoopi shot Joy a look, a silent warning. But the line had already been crossed. Eastwood didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed just slightly as he looked straight at Joy. "Which comments would those be, Joy?" She smiled, but there was something artificial behind it. "Oh, you know, your support for politicians who shall remain nameless, but who've made some pretty questionable statements about women and minorities." Eastwood remained calm. "I don't recall making any statements that disparaged women or minorities." His voice carried a quiet edge. "But by association," Joy pressed, clearly emboldened. "Don't you think your political endorsements send a message?" The studio atmosphere grew tense. The other hosts exchanged glances. This wasn't the tone anyone had planned for. Eastwood leaned back in his chair and gave Joy a long, cold look. "Young lady, I've been in this business since before you were born. I've worked with people of every background, every political persuasion, and I judge them by their character, not their party affiliation." Joy scoffed slightly. "Young lady?" she said, her voice rising. "Excuse me, but I think I have every right to ask tough questions of my guests." Eastwood didn't miss a beat. "And I have every right not to answer gotcha questions from someone more interested in creating controversy than having a conversation." Joy's face turned red. "Gotcha questions? I'm asking about your public statements, Clint. That's called journalism." Eastwood let out a low chuckle that seemed to hit harder than any sharp reply. "Is that what we're calling it now? In my day, journalism involved research and facts, not fishing expeditions." Whoopi tried to steer the conversation back. "Let's maybe get back to talking about your film, Clint." But Joy wasn't letting go. "No, I think this is important. You can't just come on television and expect softball questions when you've made controversial political statements like—" Eastwood's voice remained quiet, but that glint in his eye was unmistakable to anyone who'd watched his movies. "Are we talking about the film, or are you trying to make this personal again?" Joy didn't hesitate. "I'm talking about accountability. Public figures have a responsibility to their fans." Eastwood didn't move. His expression didn't shift, but his voice came low and sharp. "And what responsibility do television hosts have to their guests?" "To ask the tough questions that matter," Joy replied. "No," Eastwood said. "To treat people with basic human decency. Something you seem to have forgotten." The energy in the studio shifted again. It was electric. The tension between them was no longer a matter of disagreement. It was personal. Whoopi glanced toward the producers offstage. Sarah tried to chime in again, attempting to return to the topic of Eastwood's film. "Clint, your films have entertained millions of people around the world. What's been the most rewarding part of your career?" Eastwood gave Sarah a nod, but he wasn't finished with Joy. "You know what, Sarah? I'll answer that. The most rewarding part has been working with professionals. People who understand that respect is earned, not demanded. People who don't hide behind a panel of co-hosts to take cheap shots at their guests." Joy's mouth opened slightly. "Cheap shots? I'm asking legitimate questions about your political views." "No," Eastwood replied again. "You're trying to create a viral moment for your social media clips. There's a difference between asking someone about their views and trying to ambush them." Joy, pushing back harder now, insisted, "I'm not ambushing anyone. I'm doing my job." Eastwood leaned slightly forward again. "Your job is to interview guests about why they're here. I came here to talk about a film I'm proud of. A story about redemption and second chances. You want to talk politics and start drama?" Whoopi stepped in again. "The film does sound fascinating, Clint. Can you tell us about the main character?" Eastwood nodded slowly but kept his gaze fixed on Joy. "It's about a man who's made mistakes, but he's trying to do better. Sometimes the biggest obstacles aren't the ones in front of you. They're the people who want to keep you defined by your past instead of letting you grow." The implication was clear. Joy shifted in her seat, visibly rattled. The others stayed quiet. Even the audience was holding its breath. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. For once, Joy Behar, known for her sharp tongue and snappy comebacks, was silent. Clint Eastwood's words had landed with a weight few in the room had anticipated. The live audience didn't erupt or cheer. Instead, a thick, heavy silence filled the air. It was the kind of moment you could feel pressing against your skin. The kind of silence that isn't empty but charged, brimming with something real. Clint finally broke eye contact with Joy and turned back to Whoopi, his tone softening slightly. "The film explores how people carry their mistakes, how they try to find peace with them. I think that's something a lot of people can relate to." Whoopi nodded, appreciating the shift. "I think so too. We've all done things we regret. That's part of life. What matters is what we do after." Clint offered her a faint smile. "Exactly." But even as the conversation returned to safer ground, the energy in the studio was irrevocably changed. The audience, once cheering and clapping with ease, now sat more quietly, watching every move, every word. The cameras might still have been rolling, but everyone knew they'd just witnessed something real, something unscripted. It was no longer about a movie. It had become a live reflection of the very themes Eastwood's film was built upon: redemption, grace, confrontation, and dignity. Joy sat rigid, arms crossed now, still fuming. Her expression was a mix of disbelief and defiance. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not like this. Most guests deferred, brushed her off politely, or ignored her digs entirely. But Eastwood had matched her. Not with volume or bluster, but with a kind of calm, unshakable resolve. And that was perhaps more unsettling than if he'd raised his voice. Clint turned back to Sarah, ignoring Joy now entirely. "The character I play in the film is a former boxer," he said, slipping back into storytelling mode. "Someone who walked away from the ring after a tragedy. He's been hiding from the world for over a decade. But life has a way of pulling you back in, especially when you're trying to avoid it." Sarah smiled. That sounds like a powerful role, and a deeply personal one. It is, Clint said. It reminds me a bit of the world today. So much noise. So many people shouting at each other, trying to be the loudest in the room. But the ones who matter, really matter, are the ones who know how to listen. That line was aimed nowhere and everywhere at once. Again, the implication was clear, and Joy heard it. Her jaw clenched. She leaned toward her mic. So are you suggesting that asking questions is being loud? That speaking up is somehow wrong now? Clint didn't look at her. No, I'm saying there's a difference between speaking up and talking over people. The audience responded this time, a soft murmur of agreement. It wasn't applause, but it was something. A subtle but unmistakable signal that the tide in the room had shifted. Whoopi, ever the peacemaker, jumped in again. Well, I think we've touched on a lot of different sides of this today, haven't we? She said with a half laugh, trying to bring the room back to neutral. Clint smiled faintly and looked around. Life's full of different sides. It's how you handle them that defines you. From the corner of the set, a producer gave the time signal. The segment was nearly over. Whoopi leaned forward. Clint, it's been something having you here today. I appreciate you having me, Clint said, rising slowly. He shook hands with Whoopi and Sarah. Then, almost as an afterthought, he looked over at Joy. For a moment it seemed he might just walk past her. But he paused. With the same calm tone he had used throughout, he said simply, We don't have to agree, but we can still be civil. Joy didn't respond immediately. She was clearly thrown off, still mentally replaying what had just happened. But she finally nodded. Just once. No words. And with that, Eastwood walked off stage. The cameras cut to commercial, but the room remained oddly quiet. The audience wasn't sure what they'd just seen. It hadn't been the kind of explosive meltdown that made headlines every week. It wasn't a shouting match or a walk-off. It was something rarer in today's world. An unshakable display of quiet authority. A moment of restraint. A reminder that strength doesn't always need to raise its voice. Backstage, Clint Eastwood barely broke stride. He greeted the stagehands, thanked the crew, and walked toward the exit. A younger production assistant caught up with him, looking slightly stunned. Mr. Eastwood, he said, that was something. Clint turned and offered a half smile. That's life, kid, he said. Sometimes you just gotta look it in the eye and keep walking. As he disappeared down the hallway, there was no bravado, no lingering bitterness. Just a man who had weathered tougher storms, both on screen and off. Back on set, Joy was adjusting her microphone, trying to joke with the others and regain her rhythm. But her laugh sounded hollow now, her usual fire dimmed. Sarah leaned over to her, voice low but kind. That wasn't your best moment, Joy. Joy didn't respond. She just stared at the coffee mug in front of her, replaying the conversation in her mind. And the audience? They would be talking about this moment for a long time. Not because of outrage or scandal, but because it was rare, authentic. And whether people sided with Clint or Joy didn't really matter in the end. What mattered was that, for once, in a sea of noise, someone had chosen to speak with calm, deliberate honesty. And reminded everyone watching that sometimes, strength speaks softest. Later that day, clips of the interview began circulating online. Social media was ablaze, but not in the usual outrage-driven way. There were no hashtags calling for boycotts, no viral rants dissecting every word. Instead, people were reflecting, sharing, quoting. The moment between Eastwood and Behar became a talking point, not because it was explosive, but because it was controlled, unexpected, real. People from across the political spectrum found something in it. Some admired Eastwood's restraint, the way he maintained his composure in the face of obvious provocation. Others found themselves, maybe reluctantly, agreeing with the idea that listening had become a lost art. Even those who disagreed with Clint's politics found it hard to argue with his demeanor. Clips of him saying, "There's a difference between speaking up and talking over people," began trending. News outlets picked it up, some spinning it, some praising it. Panel shows ran the footage with their usual commentary, but even the most boisterous hosts found themselves a little more measured when discussing it. There was something about the moment that had softened the usual shouting matches. For her part, Joy Behar didn't issue any statement. She didn't address the exchange on social media. She didn't mention it on the next episode of the show. But viewers noticed a change in her tone, subtle as it was. A little more caution, a little less interruption. It wasn't a transformation, but it was something. In interviews following the release of the film, Clint Eastwood was asked about the encounter a few times. He never lingered on it. He deflected gracefully, calling it a moment of television or just a conversation. But you could tell in the glint of his eye that he knew what it meant. Not just for television, but for the culture. He'd been in the business long enough to know when something strikes a nerve. He didn't need to shout to get his point across. That had always been his way, on screen and off. Stoic, deliberate, patient. He'd built a career on saying more with silence than most actors could say with monologues. And in that short moment on live TV, he had done it again. The movie did well, both critically and commercially. Not a blockbuster, but it didn't need to be. It was the kind of film that stuck with you, like The Interview, a slow burn, the kind of story people thought about weeks later, finding new meaning in a line or a glance. It was about regret and grace, and how hard it is to move forward when you're still dragging your past behind you. And in an odd, unintended way, that appearance on The View became an extension of the film itself, a real-life version of the themes Clint had explored on screen. The veteran actor standing firm, not in arrogance, but in principle. The loudest person in the room being reminded that volume doesn't equal strength. That confrontation doesn't always require escalation. Young people especially took note. Clips were shared with captions like, "Masterclass in composure," or "This is how you disagree without losing your soul." It was a lesson a lot of people didn't know they needed, until they saw it. In the weeks that followed, the buzz faded. As it always does. The news cycle moved on. The internet turned its attention elsewhere. But the clip kept circulating in smaller circles. A reminder, a moment, something worth holding on to. And Clint? He went back to work. He wasn't interested in making headlines, never had been. He was interested in telling stories, in finding the quiet truths most people overlook. That had always been his strength. Not the punch, but the pause. Not the noise, but the space between it. He gave no further comment about Joy Behar. Never mocked her, never gloated. He let the moment stand on its own. And maybe that's why it stuck. Because in a world addicted to outrage, where everyone rushes to claim victory or cry offense, Clint Eastwood just let it be. And somehow that said everything. If you like this video, then subscribe.